don't laugh, all right? Promise you won't laugh. I find myself thinking about Galileo Galilei quite a lot at the moment. Now, this is not like that thing that went viral last year that I still don't really understand about the amount of times in a day that men find themselves thinking about the Roman Empire. I don't think I've ever thought about the Roman Empire unprompted in a kind of regular way. Did you know? Did this reach you? Did this beep on your radar? It probably started on TikTok or something. But there was this thing about men. And the amount of times a day they found themselves thinking about the Roman Empire, and it became something of a craze. It went a little bit bonkers. I don't think I'm like that with Galileo Galilei, but I did a play when I was a youngster, when I was at university. I played him, actually. Who's it by? Is it by Bertolt Brecht, Keith, that play? I think it is. I played Galileo Galilei, and then a little later in life I studied him. And I'm haunted by this... What would you call it? It's not even a philosophical conundrum. It's a sort of... I'm haunted by this distillation of the human condition, right? Don't be too pedantic on correcting my history or my understanding of what happened. But this Dutch dude called Copernicus invented or certainly popularized what we today would call the telescope. And this enabled people who were fascinated by the mechanics of existence, which of course has been the concern of philosophers forever. It enabled them to actually study the skies, to study the heavens, to study the planets. When I say don't be too pedantic on the detail, for example, when I say the whole world believed, I mean the Western world. And we're talking about the Western world today. The world believed, and had done forever, that the sun revolved around the earth, that the earth was the center of the universe. It kind of had to be because God made the universe. And with Copernican technology, well played, Mick, Galileo, just let him go, James. With Copernican technology, i.e. the telescope, Galileo was essentially able, and this is where my science might get a little bit sketchy, he was essentially able to track the planets, to track the orbits of planets, and establish beyond any reasonable doubt that the center of our solar system, as the modern name rather gives away, was the sun, not the earth. I think it's called heliocentrism, that the sun was the center of the earth. Now, he was Polish, I think, not Dutch, but he must have been knocking around the Netherlands. Anyway, I digress. I told you I'd make mistakes. I got his name right. Copernicus, that is. Polish, I think, not Dutch. And apologies on that, actually. I'd be a big hero of Poland, I imagine, and that's quite a rude little mistake to make, so please don't think I'm making light of it. But all Christian theology, and therefore all Western civilization, was built upon the idea that God made... I mean, you know the story, don't you? He had a rest on the seventh day, that one. You remember? Yes. So God made everything. And therefore earth... and man, his most wonderful creation, was at the center of absolutely everything. So no one could believe Galileo. And the thing that fascinates me, and the reason why it haunts me, if that's the right word, is because I wonder how it broke down. I wonder how many people looked through his telescope and thought, crikey, he's right, but I'm never going to say so. Galileo himself, I think he only got absolved of heresy in my lifetime. About 30 years ago, I think the Vatican finally got around to saying, actually, he's not a wrong 'un. He was right all along. But they could not go there because it shook the very foundations of their entire existence. And I'm fascinated, even more so today, for reasons that I hope are fairly obvious. I'm fascinated by how it breaks down. How many people looked at the sky, looked at his charts, looked at the detail, looked at the facts, looked at the evidence, and found themselves thinking, yep, he's absolutely right, but there's no earthly way I'm ever going to say so because it's more than my life is worth, literally. Or I'm too ambitious to say this. I'm thinking now about figures in court, or I mean, a priest couldn't go there, but could politicians? And how many people just didn't know or didn't care? And then how many people were actually brave enough to stand up and say, look, it's a bit like saying the emperor's got no clothes on. The earth revolves around the sun, not the other way round. And that's why I'm thinking about Galileo at the moment, because I think we might be in a political parallel to a moment like that. Not on the same scale, not least because he was describing permanence, whereas politics is by definition temporary. But the shift beneath our feet is so profound that the temptation to diminish it or ignore it or pretend that it's not happening, not for reasons of ambition or selfishness or corruption, but just because of being overawed by the scale of what is occurring. And listen, I do this for a living, but the ice beneath my feet is never thinner than when I find myself wondering whether we're in the presence of epochal moments that a lot of people who do what I do for a living, whether speaking or writing, are not properly acknowledging. I don't think that Donald Trump's presidency is going to go the way of Brexit. I can't imagine people who've spent years telling you that Donald Trump's no big deal and he's not going to do anything awful. I don't think they're going to do what they've done with Brexit and turn around in a few weeks' time and say, oh, why do we even have to talk about him anymore? Let's just stop talking. All the people who said Brexit would be brilliant. Oh, no, I don't want to talk about it anymore. All the people who've been very warm towards Donald Trump. Oh, no, I don't want to talk about it. I can't see how that can happen because the stakes are even higher. This is this is world peace that is in peril. And that's why I want to talk about last night's UN votes. That's why I want to really just have a conversation. Incredibly complicated territory sometimes lends itself to incredibly simple questions. And the simplest question of all, or perhaps the second simplest question I ever ask you, after what was it like? The second simplest question I ever ask you is, how big a deal is this? Or, of course, we could go a little bit Marvin Gaye and ask what's going on. So the headline, it truly, I was trying to watch The One Show, actually. The actor who played Martin Fowler on the live version of EastEnders giving a charming interview with Robert Carlyle sitting next to him. But and then this sort of pinged on my device. US sides with Russia in UN resolutions on Ukraine. And I shared it on Blue Sky. I think I shared the Financial Times story saying something profound, a joke. And then about 3 minutes later, the story I'd shared, the headline I'd shared, at Mr James OB if you want to follow me, had been deleted. And I found myself thinking, God, maybe Galileo was wrong. Maybe this wasn't actually as big a deal. Maybe the world hasn't shaken beneath my feet. Why have they deleted? I still don't know why they deleted it, because as far as I can tell, there was nothing in it that was wrong. And then various other media organisations piled in with a report about the United States siding with Russia. What does that do to you? Just those words there. Even before I finish the sentence. The United States siding with Russia in votes at the United Nations to mark the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So they have gone in 2 years from giving Volodymyr Zelensky an almost unprecedented standing ovation in Congress to publicly, formally, and openly siding with the regime that undertook the murderous and illegal invasion of Ukraine's sovereign territory. They've done it in 2 years, or slightly more. I forget precisely when the standing ovation at Congress was. The US has twice sided with Russia in votes at the United Nations to mark the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, when the Vatican moved to shut down Galileo, it would have been an act of extraordinary courage, to tell the truth. I think you probably could have got your head chopped off. Or burnt at the stake. I think they were more into that. The French were the world leaders on chopping off heads. I think that the Catholics were more into burning people at the stake. I don't know how brave you would have to be. I don't think anyone could have sat in the room with the Pope at a press conference and stuck up for Galileo Galilei, right? But he was telling the demonstrable truth. He was telling the demonstrable truth. He was literally showing you the evidence that proved he was right. The facts were on his side. And the Pope was insisting that up was down, black was white, and the sun revolved around the earth. So no one could have done that. Their life wouldn't have been worth it. Yesterday, Emmanuel Macron, a sort of interesting politician, but far from an inspirational one. I don't know who was the last inspirational politician, apart from Volodymyr Zelensky. He had to do the same thing. He had to sit in the Oval Office or wherever the press conference took place and essentially say in front of the Pope or the most powerful man on the planet, so that parallel works, I've not gone mad, or no madder than usual, and he had to say, no, that's just not true. Europe is not going to get all the money back from Ukraine. It hasn't made loans, guaranteed loans, and it hasn't paid less than the United States has. And the days, God, I'm nostalgic for the days when we could do phone-ins about whether or not Donald Trump realised he was lying. Was he being dishonest? Was he being thick? Or was he being a curious psychological combination of all of the above in order to achieve as yet unspecified ends? Do you remember when we could do that, when the stakes were considerably lower and you could just sit there and say, Donald Trump's just said another thing that's categorically untrue? Does he know that he's lying? Does he just not understand that what he said is untrue? Or is there some mysterious third way that bears a very little brain like you and me cannot fully contemplate because he's playing 8D chess like the genius he said? No, I think those days are gone. It is a moment of extraordinary peril, but I don't know how many of us can even begin to claim to understand it. Two European leaders, the new incoming Chancellor of Germany, and the Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, essentially defining a new world order. Merz in particular, the German fella in particular, on the day of his electoral success, talks about getting to work immediately on detaching Germany from the United States of America. And listen, he's a massive Atlanticist historically. I think we've all been on a bit of a crash course with the new German Chancellor, but he is more of an Atlanticist, much more than, for example, Angela Merkel, with whom he didn't get on very well. Much, much more of an Atlanticist than Olaf Scholz historically. And he has now said, well, that massive bridge across the Atlantic that I've dedicated my entire political career to nurturing and burnishing and valuing, I'm going to start knocking it down tomorrow. I'm going to start detaching Germany from the United States and moving it closer or further, ever further into Europe. And then Macron yesterday had to essentially interrupt a press conference. You'd have got your head chopped off for this in the 17th century. If you had interrupted a king or interrupted a pope to say, that's not true, that thing you're saying. It couldn't happen. This is what it sounds like in 2025.
Will France support the U.S. being compensated?
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated because they are the one to lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for could be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money. To be clear, we have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day, in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us. Super. It will be loan at the end of the day, and Russia will have paid for that.
If you believe that, it's okay with me.
Mr. President,
but they get their money back, we don't, and now we do. But that's only fair.
Mr. President, Russia should be the one that pays everybody back. Are they the aggressors?
Well, we're negotiating everything, and everything's on the table, and we'll see if we can get some land back, and we'll see about a lot of different things. And we're going to be making a little speech and say a few words in a little while. We're going to have another meeting, a luncheon meeting. And we'll see you in about 2 hours, okay?
So, corrected, and then a weird thing. Like I say, I think the days of having fun trying to analyse the psychology are over. Like, he has to give people permission to believe the truth. If you want to believe that, that's okay by me. I mean, boy, that's fascinating, isn't it? If you want to understand dictatorships and demagoguery, authoritarianism, you have to. He thinks he gives you permission to believe the truth. That's a bit like the Pope, right? In era that I was discussing. So we will decide what is true or not. It doesn't matter what you see through your telescope. It doesn't matter what you've got actually in front of you in the night sky. I will give you permission to believe the truth. Until then, please continue to believe the lie. And then he sort of lies anyway. And then it moves to the vote. And the United States of America votes the same way as Belarus, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Israel, Mali, the Marshall Islands, and the Russian Federation. A couple of other countries as well. On one of these votes, even China abstained, demonstrating more concern for the integrity of Europe than our historical greatest ally, the United States of America. You can't find the words to describe and articulate the gravity of the moment. And then you've got that tiny little voice in the back of your head that just says, maybe in 2 months' time, we'll look back and think, oh, okay, so it was a bull in a china shop situation and everything. And I don't know how long you can comfort yourself with that thought. The United States sided with Russia in a United Nations resolution vote on Ukraine. Sided with Russia. The United States sided with Russia. I do not know why Israel is allying itself with these monsters, but that's a conversation for another day. And by that I mean we probably will have it. But what I want you to do today, if you possibly can, is just have a swing at what this means. Because I think it's too big for us to properly contemplate unless we force ourselves to do so. What would you have done back in the day when a rumour went round that Italian fella had proved that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way round? You probably would have thought, crikey, I'm not getting involved in any of that malarkey. What does it all mean? I don't know. I've got bread to bake. I've got kids to raise. I've got fields to plough. I don't know what you'd have thought. Depends on what you did. But I'm asking you, I suppose, how huge is it?